Greetings and salutations, YouTubers and malefactors. We're back here at Stoplogic Motorsports. Granted, we're not live, but we're going to do a little comparison that was a viewer request, or subscriber request, or however anyone would want to put it. So, as you all have known for a while, I've followed the channel, I've owned a few bikes, but namely recently the 2020 WR250R and the 2022 CRF450RL. I've raced both, I've ridden both in trails, munched a good amount of miles on the street on the WR, not so much on the CRF, but I have done some highway riding and some travel on it. So, we're going to do a little bit of a dive into the two bikes and the pros and cons of each. So I own the WR250R for right around 2 years. I put about 6,000 miles on it. I've owned the CRF450RL for about 4 months now. I've put about 700 miles on it. So pretty much with the WR250R, I did every mod short of a 290 big bore kit and a header and exhaust combo, mainly because I didn't really see the point in the header and exhaust combo, and I wasn't really willing to spend the type of money that was necessary for the big bore kit. So that was a 3.1 gallon tank, radiator guards, engine guard, EJK, high flow filter, 1 1/8" bars, which I also tried the Fast Flex on this bike, 49 tooth rear sprocket, Go Race suspension, 3/4 inch lowering on it, tail tidy, you know, kind of the common stuff, and of course seat concept seat. And just to preface, I started at $78.64 out the door. That's after tax, title, license, all your change in your left hand pocket, etc., etc. I invested close to about $2,600 in mods, and by the time the bike was all said and done, I had about $10,464 into the bike, which is, you know, everyone's gonna go, why didn't you buy a KTM if you're already at $10,000? Well, I wanted kind of like a low-strung, mostly maintenance-free XR kind of experience with this bike, and I got most of that. So on the red corner, we have the CRF450RL. I got the trade-in for the WR, but adding all of that money together after the trade-in and tax, title, license and all that, it was $96.21 out the door. I've put about, and I'm almost embarrassed to admit, $4,540 of mods into this bike. And it has the $1,300 Recluse Radius CX, suspension done by LDR Suspension with a 1-inch lowering kit, and another $1,200, so we're $2,500 in right there. $800 Takamoto AIM ECU, that's another $800. Couple of hundred in the bash plate and radiator guards. The optional Takamoto ECU, which is about $180. Tail tidy about $50, and a few various other parts, which I have the flywheel weight sitting in my kitchen counter waiting for me to have the ennui necessary to take off the flywheel and install it flywheel weight. And oh yeah, throttle tamer, hand guards, and that's all. That comes to about $200, and the Mako XC360, which is going to be reviewed in a different video. Also, to reach out to Takamoto for all their help on this. They've been invaluable in helping, and I promise whenever I'm done moving, I have a truck back, I will do the bar vibration video. So, the specs on both bikes are, you have the WR250R, which is a 249cc water-cooled engine, roughly about 28 horsepower on paper. You're closer to about 26, 27 with mods, minus the big bore kit. And on paper they say the bike is 298 pounds, which actually, using the scale weighing method with all the protection mods and the 3.1 gallon IMS tank, it actually was closer to 337 to 340 pounds. The CRF450RL, around 38 horsepower, bone stock. You could give or take up to about 42 with most of your easy mods, minus the San Diego cams and all of that, which I haven't done to the bike. And they have a claimed wet weight of 287 pounds, which one of the earlier videos I did with everything that I have on it, it's weighing in about 322 using home scales. So, what does the WR do better than the CRF? Well, the biggest elephant in the room that we all have to address is the maintenance intervals. Valve jobs on the WR250R 24,000 miles. Oil changes, they say, could be 8,000 miles. I usually did them about 4 with oil and filter. It's a very relaxed bike. If you had Ron Popeil marketing your motorcycle, this is the set it and forget it bike. One of the other advantages of the WR over the CRF is the shorter wheelbase and more aggressive trail and rake. So one thing that the WR does better out of the box, granted the stock suspension, we'll touch on that later, is with that really short trail and rake, it actually corners a bit better than the CRF. You can put it where you want it a bit more. It has a feel very similar to a KDX 200. So if you rode those growing up, the seating position, the way that it handles, the way that it steers into things, it's actually very comparable to a KDX. You add about 80 pounds to it. The other big advantage is the bike. I've never gotten that thing to flame out. I've really had to work to stall it when I did stall it, and it was, there was no crack the throttle and then all of a sudden it just leaves you hanging. The bike is easier to work on versus the CRF450RL. One thing that Yamaha does better than most other manufacturers is they make things on the bikes reachable. Like, most of your bolts are not impossible to get to. When you're doing your suspension, they always have one of those flat-faced bolts that has a stop on it, where you're not having to straddle the bike with 2 different wrenches when you're doing linkage, suspension linkage, stuff of that nature. And it's to be honest, a good $3,000-$4,000 cheaper to achieve a desirable bike. The other advantage, I would say, tied for 5th as one reason that the WR is better, is there's a lot less engine vibration. So it's a dual overhead cam bike. It's got great counterbalancing. It vibrates a whole lot less at the bars and throughout the bike than the CRF450R, which is a single overhead cam bike. But, alright, well, where does the WR fall flat as a bike? Even with full complement of mods, the bike lacks a low-end snap to it. You can't crack the throttle and then feel like a gigantic rush of power. It doesn't really work like that. You have to ride it on the pipe like a 1990s era 2-stroke to really get the snap out of the bike, which is kind of hard when you're doing bar width single track trails at a crawl. The other issue with it is it's been discontinued a couple of years back, and the aftermarket's drying up on it. So all the nifty sites where you could get Lex exhaust or Leo vents, stuff of that nature, shifters, specific pegs, a lot of those aftermarket parts are, they're disappearing. It's gone extinct. One issue that I had with the bike is that it eats chain sliders and swing arms, and whenever I lowered the bike, it was far worse than stock. And I have to give credit to Robert McCreary with the WR Facebook group, the guy probably lost years of his life trying to troubleshoot why this bike was chewing through a swing arm guard every time I rode it. The Tenere 700 and the WR250R have a very, I guess, steep profile on their swing arm. It's a very odd pivot point, which limits the amount of sprockets you can put on the bike, but also tends to make your chain sliders wear quickly. It's kind of a Yamaha thing. The stock suspension on the bike, it's borderline dangerous. There's tons of videos out there on YouTube if you want to have a good late night laugh of people being yeeted over the bars because of the pogo-like rear suspension. And you can tune it to make it livable, but it's pretty turgid. So the lack of snap paired with the weight of the bike, it's hard to ride any sort of like hard enduro or anywhere where you need to loft a front wheel quickly, or whenever you're riding deep sand, the bike doesn't get up to speed quite quick enough to really get above the sand, so to speak. Maybe if you had like a long distance of sand, it's not so bad, but if you're still bar width woods filled with sugar sand, it's a lot of work to race. And you're probably seeing some of the footage of me struggling on the bike out of Jacksboro. So, what does the CRF do better? Out of the box, the suspension is very usable. Really, I mostly modified it so I could lower it for me to touch the ground. The bike is relentlessly tall. Even with a lower seat, it's god-awful tall bike. And LDR did a really good job of tuning the suspension to make it, that much better. Not to slam Travis at Go Race, he really took the limited components of the WR and transformed it into like an unrecognizable bike in such an amazing way. But as far as he could take the WR with fully modified suspension, it was on par with stock CRF450RL suspension, and modifying the suspension on the CRF450RL is like a head and shoulders above what the WR is capable of. Another thing I absolutely love about the bike is it has a ton of low end to it. We'll touch on some of the issues with that, accessing that low end, but it's got a lot of torque. It's kind of like riding a modified DRZ 400. You just point and click and the bike goes, regardless if you're still on it or not. Nearly every mod for the bike makes an appreciable difference on the CRF 450RL. Your ECU actually makes a large difference. Your seat concept seat makes it severely more comfortable. A throttle tamer is definitely like a noticeable change. It's not incremental changes, it's very impactful changes. You feel like you get a lot for your money when you do start adding farkles to the bike. Now you have to do a ton of valve services every, I think, 1,600 miles, but on the Honda single overhead cam, the valve services are technically easier to do. There's less valve for you to work with. You have a couple of tappet style valves on there, which is a ton easier to work on than shim under bucket. Any of you DR650 owners out there, you're nodding your heads going with that knowing look that you just basically need like a valve tool and a 8mm wrench and you're good to go. Half of those valves are like that on the CRF450RL. One thing that was the plus to the WR about having the shorter wheelbase and tighter rake, the CRF longer wheelbase and wider rake makes it very stable at highway speed. It's not comfortable, but it's stable. Alright, well, what does the CRF do worse than the WR250R? Well, it vibrates a ton more. I'm still working on trying to tame this to a point where I don't have like numbness issues. You may end up spending between $2,000 and $3,000 to address flame outs if you ride technical terrain. So if you're in a desert area or kind of more so open and flowy trails, you don't really notice the flame out issue. But if you're riding any sort of like hard enduro or tight woods, like even the last race footage where I started having like a lot of tight turns and everything, the bike would still stall. It's a mixture of flame out, so everyone thinks that this bike has a flame out issue, and it's not only just flame out, it's also clutch drag. The bike is very finicky with how you set up your clutch. So the stalls are not just ECU and fueling related issues, or not setting up your RPM to the proper setting. Another thing it does worse than the WR is it runs a ton hotter. And with the Recluse CX, which is supposedly the clutch that doesn't need as much adjustment, the amount of heat this bike kicks off actually gives you appreciable fade on the Recluse CX. And funny enough, it actually reintroduces that clutch dragging issue, which I'm thinking if I can find a sweeter spot with the installed gap, maybe back it off a smidge, I can kind of compensate for that. But it is kind of a weakness of this bike, it's just how dang hot it is. And you can feel the heat just wicking off onto your leg. It's a little bit distracting. The stock gearing with first and second is a little awkward. First is a little too short, and it has a ton of engine braking. And second seems to last almost indefinitely. Oddly enough, you can take second gear up to almost 45 miles an hour. It's a little more comfortable than third, but it has kind of like a weird gearing ratio to it. And maybe tossing a 53 tooth on the rear might kind of settle that for me a bit. And until you address any of the flame out or clutch drag issues, second will net you a bit more stalls in technical terrain. So there's a item that's been noticed in the CRF450RL community regarding the oil drain plug and using a torque wrench. There's a few posts kicking around the Facebook page where people have cracked their bottom cases using the recommended 13 foot-pounds of torque on the CRF450RL drain plug. Other people say, do it hand snug. I err on the side of caution and I torque it to 9 foot-pounds and then just give it a little tap with my fingers. Excuse me. So, if the WR has a lot less issues out of the box, why did you sell it for the CRF450RL? Well, it's kind of a regional thing here. A lot of our races in Texas are deep sugar sand, whoops and ruts. The WR250 made riding these conditions somewhat of a chore. Also, no matter what I did to the bike, it would eat a $45 chain slider every ride. I basically got to the point where I had a box full of chain sliders from Rocky Mountain ATV, and every time I took it out for practice or a ride, I would lay it down on the ground and put a new chain slider on. At $45 a pop, it's kind of expensive to buy almost $500 of chain sliders and fill a box full of them. The WR has kind of a lower ceiling, so to speak, on how competitive you can make it in a racing environment. Though if you're old school and want an XR-like bike where you just change the oil, the WR is 1000% that bike. I dare say better than DRZ for maintenance-free operation. It's not a very high-strung bike, and if you are not determined to be top of the class at all times, or you don't mind struggling a bit to race, it's still a fun bike, and it's a lively bike. Not to say that the CRF450RL is an ideal race bike. With its long rake and trail and extra heft, it's closer out of the box, minus some very spendy fixes to get it rideable. Your what's a good way to put this? Basically, out of the box, it's kind of like a very rough product that It's about where the WR is after you fully mod it out of the box, and then to fix kind of the nagging issue, especially the stalling issue, you're plunking down a really big financial outlay. And at that point, when you're reaching like the $11, $12, $13, $14,000 mark, you start to wonder, should you have bought the pumpkin orange bike? That's kind of a question that you have to ask yourself. Do you like the Honda platform? Do you like kind of the more simplicity of it? Or do you want really the top of the top, creme de la creme, but you still have to spend money fixing those ECU issues and fueling issues on a KTM 501 or 500 or Husqvarna F501, just like you would a CRF. Personally, I think the WR is a superior road bike with its lack of vibration, comfort, and huge intervals of maintenance. Yamaha made a huge mistake dropping this model, and it's a highly competent bike. If you see one on the used market, snap it up. If you can't find a used one, the KLX 300 can be modded to about 85% as good as a WR that's modded. Just bike for bike. The KLX has a few frame issues and clearance that makes it kind of a more dated bike, but it's a very good, I guess, fill-in for the WR if you can't find one. And it's kind of unpleasant to mile munch on, at least in my opinion. I've seen other folks that do it on YouTube, but it's not my choice if I'm like looking at a 200 mile or 300 mile road ride. It has the potential to be competitive in a racing environment if the rider's in good shape, which I am definitely not. It wears me out. If you have some disposable income and want a vaguely competitive bike that is tolerable on the road, the CRF is a good choice, or if you ride a lot of wide open places. I think this would be a great platform for desert rallies. There will be a bit of time in between this and my next video as we're moving, but I promise I'm working on, new content. I'm just kind of truck poor at the moment, and we really have to get out of our last house. We're running out of time to get out of that rental. And just need a little bit of time to get my tools and everything. Well, thank you for hanging in here as we wax nostalgic about the venerable WR. And I guess speak complimentary of the new CRF450RL. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out, and hope to see you on the next one.